Hello and welcome to my kitchen. It's fall here in the Low Country, and if it's fall where you are, no matter where you are, it's apple season. I found these beautiful farmers market apples at my Charleston Farmers Market. They're wine sap apples, actually from North Carolina. And when I got them, I thought, apples, pork, apples, pork. What goes better than the two together? So I thought today I would whip up a wonderful fall stew that's actually featured in my newly released cookbook, Southern Farmers Market Cookbook. It's called Soulful Braised Pork and Apple Stew. Let's get cooking. Okay, here we are. For the stew today, we're working with a Boston butt. How it got that name, I really don't know. In truth, it's the shoulder of a pig. It's a working, tough muscle. So it's very well suited to braising, which is essentially, the term braising refers to cooking meat or really anything in a limited amount of liquid at a slow temperature. So it breaks it down, so this just becomes incredibly tender and wonderful. For the stew, I like to cut the beef into large chunks because, again, it is going to break down, essentially 2-inch squares. So when you're cutting through the meat, you may encounter the occasional bone, part of the shoulder blade from the pig, in which case, go ahead and cut around it. I don't think I'm going to get that today because the other section of the meat I worked with to prep today had that part of the bone in it. But if you do, leave it in because it's going to add more flavor to your stew. Also, if you encounter a chunk of fat or sinew, you might as well take it out. Before we put the pork in the pot, or in this case a Dutch oven, which is an ideal vessel for this kind of dish, we want to get it nice and hot so that the meat can immediately start the browning process. Okay. So into the hot pot, we're going to go ahead and put in, I like to use olive oil. For this kind of preparation, again, you don't have to be using $1 million at first press, just regular good quality olive oil. I also like to temper it with a little bit of butter. I love the flavor butter gives. And also, with the olive oil there, the butter's not going to burn. And you're just going to get a wonderful flavor combination. So we're going to want that to get nice and hot. We've got all the pork is all cut up. I'm going to go ahead and season it before it gets into the pan, liberally, with some nice coarse ground black pepper. I use either kosher salt or sea salt. And the two wonderful components for this dish that say autumn and just work wonderfully, wonderfully, wonderfully with apples and pork. We've got some dried sage leaves. And we're going to be adding some rosemary in a minute. This is just an incredibly festive dish, wonderful for the holidays, wonderful for the family, or for an elegant dinner party. I've done it for many, many occasions. Go ahead and get the pork in there. So once the pork is in the pan, don't be afraid to give it another shot of seasoning, because really you want to get every side of the pork coated. It's going to take a few minutes for the pork to brown on each side. Count on about 4 minutes. Cooking nicely now. I love this dish. It smells just like fall. We've got some nice browning going on at the first layer, and the browning gives that gorgeous color that we're looking for and also helps contribute to the flavor. This is what we're really kind of looking for, that nice caramelization. Delicious. See how it's browning on the bottom? This is giving us wonderful flavor dimension to the stew. It's going to give us serious rewards later on when we're eating it. All right, once we get a nice browning process underway, as you see we have with the pork, I'm going to take it out of the pan here for a moment, because what I want to do is allow the vegetable aromats, the tomato, or rather the onion and the celery and the garlic, that's going to be the flavor backdrop for the soup, to get a separate individual cooking. So the pork we could just set aside for a few minutes. And now I'm going to take this off the heat and move over to our vegetables. All right, I think celery is probably one of the most underrated vegetables, perhaps by the average consumer. It's not very sexy in most people's mind, but it is an absolute fabulous aromatic vegetable that provides flavor and dimension to really any kind of stew or soup that you're cooking. So you make use of your cutting board. It's a big cutting board. It's your friend. Onion's another classic aromat. Pretty much everything I cook with onion. The size that you cut these vegetables really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because this dish cooks for a good 3 to 4, even up to 5 hours. But I'd like these guys to be pretty small so that they break down and really become a consistent part of the sauce that's pretty much not discernible in texture, but absolutely certainly in flavor. Okay, 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. Just go, actually, I'm going to use my chef's knife. Just mash it. It's great for tensione leaf. That'll take the peels right off. I think 3 cloves will do it. Again, it's just a background flavor. The real charmers in this dish are the apples and the apple cider, and of course the pork. So we're returning to the same pan. Again, all that beautiful caramelization on the bottom. We're going to get the vegetables in there. Again, we're going to stir them to coat. We're going to get these babies nice and soft and sweet. About 5 minutes on low heat. Again, salt and pepper. And if you like, you can add a little more sage. So the onions and the garlic and the celery are softened up and sweetened up. We're going to go ahead and add the pork back to the mixture along with all the juices. You do not want to miss those. Give the bottom of the pan a stir. You're starting to pick up some of those beautiful brown bits. We're going to come back to that in a minute. This is a wonderful trick. It's to thicken up a soup without adding a roux or getting into a complicated thing with a surry. It's called a sanger. I learned this in France. You give a little dusting, essentially, of flour to the meat while it's in the pan. And go ahead and turn up the heat a little bit. So automatically, the flour is clinging to the meat and to the vegetables. And you want to cook that out briefly for just about a minute to break down the flour flavor. And then later, that flour is going to come back as a natural thickening agent along with the apples in this beautiful, marvelous stew. So we're deglazing not with wine, not with vinegar, but with fresh apple cider that I got, of course, at the farmer's market. You want to get raw apple cider, unprocessed, and without, certainly not pasteurized, because this is the backbone of our sauce, and you want that wonderful sweetness. Okay, what we want to do is have the apple cider reduce for a moment. So we've got this on high. We're bringing it down to, up to a boil. I'm going to cook off about a quarter of that apple cider to concentrate the flavors. Meantime, I'm basically simply coring. I just use my knife. I don't bother with a core. We're coring the apples. Go ahead and cut out the core. And we're going to leave the skin. I leave the skin on for the soup because basically what happens is the skin, of course, is ultra nutritious, and the pectin in the skin is a natural thickener for the stew. So the apples are going to completely break down in the process, again, about 4 hours of slow cooking, and give this wonderful depth of flavor to the stew. I love wine saps for this dish because it's an heirloom, it's a wonderful heirloom apple that's indigenous to this part of the country. A similar kind of apple that might work very nicely is a Macintosh. But you really want to go with what's local. Anyway, again, nice coarse chunks. Really, really nice. You won't believe how they break down. 2 big apples will do ya here. So essentially the final step, I'm going to add a couple sprigs of fresh rosemary. We're going to take those out later. And then some nice quality chicken stock, hopefully one that you made yourself. I don't have any on hand. Ideally, it's a low sodium, good quality chicken stock. Just enough in a braising to cover most of the meat, not all of it. And there you go. We're getting ready to put this in the oven. Okay, so now we're really good to go. I'm going to give one final kiss of salt and pepper. It's our last minute before this stew takes its long, slow cook over low heat. You can do it on the stovetop or in a low oven, about 300. I like to do mine on the stovetop because I can control what's happening. I can look into it and smell it more often. So bring it up to a boil, down to a simmer, slightly cracked lid, and then real low. You want this barely simmering, and then you can forget about it. Go read a book. All right, let's see what we've got. Been cooking low and slow about 3 to 4 hours. We want it to be nice and broken down, and voila, look at that. So let's see how it tastes. Wonderful sweetness. of the cider, the roundness of the pork. It doesn't even need a thing. This fabulous stew is perfect just on its own. I like to dress it up with grits, however. It gives it another flavor and texture dimension and a little color contrast on the plate. I've served this at dinner parties and people have literally swooned. This is Mr. Tan Man. Looks like Mr. Tan Man likes it.